Goedemiddag allemaal. Welkom op de Novadoc en Senate webinar over GDPR. In deze sessie willen we jullie vanmiddag kennis laten maken met een aantal kenmerkende onderwerpen uit de nieuwe GDPR of AVG-verordening, die van ons alle grote impact gaat hebben op de manier waarop we met z'n allen met informatie omgaan. En zo dadelijk zal Roland Merkt van Senate concreet ingaan op de onderwerpen en deze presenteren hoe we die met Velnet en de gerelateerde tools kunnen bijdragen aan de GDPR compliancy. Senate en Novadoc werken al jaren samen, zoals onder andere bij de implementatie van IBM System Monitor bij de Belastingdienst. En in dit webinar is een goed voorbeeld hoe we onze kennis en samenwerking combineren om jullie op de Nederlandse markt van dienst te zijn. Zoals aangekondigd in de inschrijving is dit seminar in het Engels. En Roland, please take over the webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, John, and hello and welcome. Goedemiddag. That's my only Dutch, I'm sorry. So we really have to do it in English. So what we would like to share with you is the challenges imposed by GDPR and how a combined Novadoc and Senate solution approach can help you at least covering important case issues which are coming with GDPR in a fashion that you are auditable, and that you're compliant, and that you are very, let's say, efficient and effective in handling GDPR cases which might come from external people, whether it's customers, whether it's employees, candidates, business partners, suppliers, whatever case that may be. Quick word on Senate. We had been established in Stuttgart in Germany almost 30 years ago. In the meantime, we have grown into an international software company with 800 people in almost all continents except for Africa. And as of now, we're doing roughly 150 million in revenue, more than 10 million in EBIT, so we're financially very sound. And our focus is in two areas: product lifecycle management solutions, mostly for the aerospace and automotive industry, and enterprise information management solutions. Here we had been the first final partner in Germany back in 1995, so we have a very long history, similar to the Novadoc folks in this area. And in 1999 we introduced a solution called ECM System Monitor, which is a product that is now on the IBM portfolio, so it's available to all IBM customers through Path Advantage. And that is the first area where we had an interaction with Novadoc. As John just mentioned in the intro, we are doing a joint project at Belastingdienst, and that's the way how we became partners, and how we established a relationship and found that we have similar offerings and similar challenges that we address for our customers. So the idea was to have a joint approach to provide a solution for GDPR. GDPR comes with new obligations, much stricter obligations than in the current data protection rules. And this is not just regarding the data subject itself, so citizens that have specific rights, like, for example, in getting information, what kind of personal identifiable information, PII, is stored and processed about them. They even have the right to request access to that information, to have it deleted, rectified. They can request that the processing is restricted, especially if it comes to automated profiling. And they can also request that their personal data has to be ported to another processor, to another company, if, for example, they switch from one bank to another bank, or from one utility company to utility company. Of course, the protection of that personal data is very important, and the rules regarding accountability and breach notification are much tighter than in the past. So if a breach happens, you cannot do it like Uber did, as it was just published this week. So you cannot wait a year and then inform the public that there has been a data breach. With the new GDPR regulation, you have to, let's say, announce a breach notification to the supervisor authorities within 72 hours. And in order to be compliant with such a short time frame, you have to have a very thorough case management to handle these cases in order to meet that deadline. Of course, you have to be lawful, and you have to get consent of the data subjects regarding the processing of their data, but also the objection to the profiling. And that is new. There's strict accountability and penalties associated with that, and you have to proactively demonstrate compliance. In today's rules, at least in Germany, the focus of the companies was not that high to comply with these rules, because even if you get caught, the fines, the penalties were not very heavy. So it was cheaper paying the fine than doing a project to be compliant. Of course, in regulated industries, this has been, let's say, implemented, like banking or insurance companies. But especially in the medium-sized businesses, data protection has not the highest priority. This will change in May 2018 when GDPR kicks in, because now you have to proactively demonstrate that you're compliant with the regulation. And for example, in Germany, the local authorities, the supervisory authorities, already announced that they will do random audits of companies. So they will not wait until a company has to report a breach. They will randomly audit companies whether they are compliant with the new regulation, and if not, there will be an example, and they will have to pay significant fines. So designing, or let's say considering data protection by design and by default becomes mandatory. Whenever you implement a new solution, or whenever you change an existing solution in which personal data that imposes a high risk for the subject is processed, data protection has to be considered from the very beginning. And this is not just an IT topic, it affects a lot of business departments, because in these departments you handle personal data, whether it's HR with employee data or candidates, whether it's marketing with customer data, finance about accounting, for example, supplier data, customer data like invoicing, SEPA data, etc. Of course, IT for the technical delivery, but it also affects, for example, procurement. If you have external processors processing personal data for you, for example, HR data or marketing campaigns that are executed on your behalf, the regulations in GDPR are very strict how your procurement has to handle the data protection. As of now, if, let's say, your external supplier screws it up, it's their fault. With GDPR, it's your fault. You are accountable as the controller of the data. It's not the processor who is reliable and who is accountable, it's the controller, and that is the company who is giving the order to an external company to process personal data. So managing this personal data is very important, and you have to answer a few questions. What kind of data do I collect, and why do I collect it? What is the purpose for that? In GDPR, there has to be consent for a limited purpose of processing. And for each, let's say, kind of processing, you have to get the content of the person, of the subject. Do you regularly check for accuracy of the data? Is it still correct? And how do you store it? These are mostly technical questions. But also then, how long do I keep the data? And data is not just structured data, it's also unstructured data in documents. Wherever you have documents that contain personal data, this is relevant. So this imposes a very important question, especially for those customers already using FileNet. How long do you keep the documents in your FileNet repository? How do you manage the retention of the documents? And of course, regarding the case management itself, can you comply with individuals' requests that they may ask you in time, on time, within the deadlines, within the limit imposed by GDPR? And this is where the combined Novadoc and SYNNET offering provides a solution to answer especially these questions about the retention management of the documents and also the case handling for GDPR requests. We can differentiate that into two major categories, the technical challenges and organizational challenges. The technical challenges, for example, how do I store the data, how do I manage it, how can I ensure security, cybersecurity threats, etc. There are many vendors in the market, many tools, and many customers have already saved these or solved these challenges. Especially in regulated industries, this is something where the customers are pretty mature. On the organizational side, however, this is a little bit different. Ernst & Young just recently did a study in Germany, and they did that study with large enterprises, so the big gorillas. And one of the findings of this study was that the technical challenges are pretty much covered, but more than 30% of the companies in the survey stated that they have a lack of comprehensive management for GDPR relevant processes, handling the GDPR cases like a subject access request. What data do you have that you process for me, for example? A consistent execution and documentation of these processes, because documentation is mandatory in GDPR. If you have a request from the supervisory authority, you have to prove that you fulfilled all the steps related to a specific case, and you have to show the documentation how you handle that. So you have to provide transparency and auditability. And this is where the Novadoc and Synit solution kicks in. Of course, it costs money, but non-compliance costs not only money, but also reputation. So at the bottom line, it costs even more money. And especially with GDPR, these fines have been raised significantly. So as of today, with the current regulation, it's quite cheap compared to the new penalties which are coming with GDPR. And one of the reasons for that is that they wanted to make sure that this time the data protection is taken seriously. Of course, this is also addressing our friends in the US, like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and others, but it will be handled in the same way for the European companies. If you miss the deadlines, if you are not compliant with that regulation, this will become very, very expensive. Okay, how does the solution look like? What kind of, let's say, case handling can we help you with? The solution has two pillars. One is the case management itself, a consistent processing of GDPR relevant cases. For example, a subject access request, a data breach notification, but also a data privacy impact assessment, for example, or handling a procurement process for supplying activities which involve personal data with an external processor. These cases are handled by this case solution with a full documentation of all the activities related to such a case. So you can prove compliance, you can provide reports if there is an audit or if there's a complaint of an individual with the supervisory authority. You will have everything that you need to show bulletproof that you are compliant with the regulation. This can be combined with the multi-channel input and intelligent capturing of these requests, whether they come via fax or via letter, email, and that can be done based on Novadoc solution, NovaCap. In addition to that, the solution provides retention management, enhancing the basic capabilities of Final P8 with regard to retention handling. So the management of document retention, how long do these documents need to be kept in the repository? When do they have to be deleted? Or, for example, is there a reason not to delete the document even though that its expiration date has come because it is used in the litigation, in the legal hold? So these processes to get transparency around the retention periods of the documents and the processes, the approval processes for deletion or for legal hold, and the execution of these activities for the massive documents are handled in a retention management solution. This can be used in conjunction with the GDPR case management, but can also be used standalone in general for any documents that you have stored in your Final P8 repository. The case management solution itself, it's to plan and document all the activities in the GDPR processes. So collecting the relevant information and the documents of a GDPR case in an electronic record with a folder structure depending on the case type, subject access request, procurement, data protection impact assessment, whatever you're covering here. You can provide instructions, checklists, and templates based on your internal policies, how to handle that kind of activity. And of course, you can store all the incoming and outgoing documents, as well as internal documents, for example, approval protocols, test protocols, etc., associated with a specific case in that record. So at any time, you have transparency And you can also govern these cases regarding checkpoints, regarding approvals, but also regarding resubmission. So if a person is requesting the right to be forgotten, Article 17 in GDPR, I request that all my personal data has to be deleted. But on the other hand, you have other legal regulations, for example, to store an invoice for 7 years after the date of the invoice. Then you have to, let's say, delete all the documents which are not under other legal regulation. But this document, this invoice, for example, that has to be kept for 7 years, of course, then has to be resubmitted. And after 7 years, you have to check whether this can be deleted, either automatically or whether it's deleted in the legal hold. And if not, can then be deleted. And then you can provide the feedback to the subject that all the documents have been deleted on time. So that is a very important thing. If you have other regulations interfering with GDPR right to be forgotten, that these are not forgotten. The full documentation of the case, and of course the capability to evaluate the cases if there's an external audit, if an internal audit, and for compliance reporting. What kind of use cases can we address? Anything which is related to the personal identifiable information, the personal data. The subject access request that an individual is asking about the information that you're processing and is requesting activities, whether it's providing access to that information, whether it's rectifying information, correcting errors that may be in the data, or whether it's just objection to processing, to profiling, or in the worst case, the request to delete all the data that you have for this individual person. The deadline in GDPR for that activity is 1 month. So if you are not complying with that, the person has the right to complain with the supervisory authority, file a complaint, and then you have an audit. That is bad. It's even worse in the case of a data breach. In this case, if the data breach imposes a high risk to the person, you have to notify the supervisory authorities within 72 hours and also the persons or the subjects which are affected by this data breach. And that's going to be a challenge because in the very moment when you have identified the data breach, the clock is ticking and making sure that all these activities, all the checkpoints, all the approvals, etc., are handled properly and are documented properly within 72 hours. That's not an easy task to fulfill. Then we have risk management related activities like privacy impact assessments or data protection impact assessments. So you have to periodically assess the risk in your processes and the tools to handle GDPR related activities and data, especially with data protection impact assessments when you have to check new applications, new solutions, or if you do changes to existing solutions, this has to be properly documented and shown in the case of an audit. If your data protection system is already, for example, certified, ISO 27001, for example, of course, you have to do periodic checks of these systems and also do recertification, whether it's internal or external. So all these activities which are around this auditing need to be handled properly. And last but not least, if you as a data processor or data controller outsource activities to external suppliers, to external data processors, you have to make sure as a controller you are auditable and you are accountable for all the personal data that is processed, but all the rules and all the regulations are fulfilled by your supplier. And if your supplier uses third-party suppliers, also by their suppliers. This can be based on model clauses provided by the EU Commission, by codes of conduct and other things. But it's especially important if you're processing data outside of the European Union. For example, if you have a cloud provider who's based in the US, of course, that has to be taken into account. Okay, let's do an example. GDPR request, subject access request regarding personal data. So in this case, you have to provide information about the data that is collected. If requested, fix it, or recall the right to process the data. The subject might even request that the data is deleted or sent to another controller because they, for example, stop any business relationship with you. They select a competitor and they request that all the data is transferred to that competitor. Something you don't have to do today, but which will be part of GDPR. The deadline, as I said, is 1 month. We have multiple stakeholders which are involved in such a case or in such a process. The business units affected, whether it's, for example, data related to a customer, to an employee, to a candidate, to a business partner. Of course, the mandatory data protection officer and the IT department to deliver the activity and to execute it. The documents related to such a request might include instructions, checklists that you have internally to make sure that the process is handled properly and with as little errors as possible. Then, of course, the incoming documents, for example, a letter or an email written by that subject, by that person, internal documents and protocols, how you handle a request, for example, the decision which data shall be deleted and which shall not be deleted, whether it's based on other regulation or other reasons. And of course, the outgoing documents, all the correspondence that you have with the subject, but also for correspondence, for example, with legal counsel or with the supervisory authority. A similar approach is taken for the breach notification. Here we have to respond to data leaks with high risk for the subjects. So not each breach is a high risk for a subject. So of course you have to check whether the subject affected need to be notified and whether the supervisory authorities need to be notified. And as I said, the deadline is very short, only 72 hours. Again, we have multiple stakeholders involved in such a process and multiple documentations that have to be kept for transparency. Similar with the data privacy impact assessment, all the new IT solutions and any solution that is going to be changed require a risk assessment if personal data is processed and how this personal data can be minimized. So with the new regulation, you have to minimize the processing of data and you're only allowed to process data if you have the consent of the subject. So this has to be taken into consideration whenever you implement a new solution or if you change existing solutions. Again, different stakeholders, different kinds of documents that have to be involved and that have to be stored in the repository. The risk management, that's a periodic assessment of your processes and tools related to the processing of that personal data. If you have a data protection management system already implemented, then of course this has to be audited on a regular basis. You have to record the processing activity, the consent management and the purpose limitation, and especially the deletion and the data minimization to make sure that you comply with GDPR. This has to be repeated on a periodic basis, so resubmission handling is important, and again, different stakeholders and different types of documents to be handled. One of the, let's say, business units that have to address the GDPR request now is procurement. If you use external suppliers to process personal data for you, whether they're inside the European Union or outside of the European Union. So there are strict regulations how the contracts with these suppliers have to look like, and there are strict regulations regarding all the, let's say, duties that come with GDPR that you have to fulfill, and you are accountable. It's not the supplier. Of course, you can sue them, but if it's a small company and the fine is high, there's nothing to collect there. You will be taken responsible for any breach, for example, for any data leak that is occurring. So you have to make sure that you comply with the regulations regarding work models or code of conduct, and that you show that everything that has to be covered in such a, let's say, procurement process with external suppliers has been done. So you have fulfilled your duty, and if then the supplier fails, at least you have a better situation than if you have not done these activities. Okay, so these are typical use cases for GDPR relevant processes. As I said, GDPR, the the handling and the minimization of data is not only relevant for structured data, but also for unstructured content. So for all the documents that you have in your finance system, you have to manage the retention periods for these documents. And with the solution that we're proposing here as an add-on to the basic or limited capabilities of Final P8, this enables you to manage the retention settings of the documents. You can easily create reports and get an overview of what kind of documents you have, what kind of retention settings, and you can in a controlled and secure manner determine which documents need to be deleted and how to process these deletions, for whether it's manually or, for example, via automated batches. All the deletions and the modification of retention settings are logged, so you have an audit trail. If there's an audit by the supervisory authority, you can show what has been done, and with the enhanced search capabilities, extending the basic capabilities of P8, it's easy for you to search for that information also in cases, for example. Very important approval processes regarding the deletion, but also legal holds to protect important documents that are not allowed to be deleted because they're, for example, needed in an audit or in a litigation. And that is very important because there are several examples in the last years where, especially in the banking sector, very, very costly fines had been imposed on the banks, like Deutsche Bank. I think they paid more than 3 or 4 billion euro within the last 10 years for fines, and not few of them had been because they had deleted documents that they should not have been deleted, or they had not deleted emails which not necessarily had to be kept, so they better had deleted them. And that's not just banking, that's also insurance, for example, or telcos, or utilities. So managing legal holds is a very, very important process. Of course, the way how you can configure it is customer specific. So that can be done by object class, by storage areas. You can create automated distribution of reports to the stakeholders so that you can make sure that it's not forgotten. And you can configure the creation of holds based on queries, for example. I want to do that for all documents for a specific object class, for a specific person, for example, for a specific customer. So that's very easy. And in the approval process, you can even specify, depending on the criticality of documents or types of documents, that, for example, the approval can only be done with a 4I principle. So there have to be a minimum of 2 people approving the deletion or the legal hold of a document before it can be processed. The architecture of the solution, it's based on Final P8. The GUI is integrated into the Content Navigator. There are 2 TNIP products, Eclise for the records and actions for the case management based on P8, and the retention solutions for the time-based deletion or the legal hold of the relevant documents, whether they're GDPR relevant or for all the documents in your final repository, that's up to you. It can be extended by NovaCap for the intelligent capturing. And then depending on your, let's say, requirements, there are several pretty cool solutions that can be combined with that solution. For example, you might consider to implement a chatbot for the collection and classification of subject requests. There's a third-party solution called the Vigo Chaos Contract that allows you to review documents with external parties, whether it's an individual, a lawyer, a supplier in a procurement process, without giving them access to your finance system and without sharing the document with them. So they only can see the document. You can, let's say, audit what activities have been done on that document, which areas of the document have been reviewed, for example, but the third party does not get a copy of the document. And you don't need a finance license for that external party. It's not an external user because they don't have direct access to the finance system. What's analytics for artificial intelligence, very difficult word, based analysis, for example, for risk assessments, Or if you want to share documents with an external party, Box is a pretty cool add-on for enterprise file sync and share. So you can share documents with external parties in a very easy and controlled manner. The benefits: transparency, of course, meeting the duties and the deadlines for GDPR actions, the cases, managing the document retentions and their expirations, so you know exactly which documents are allowed to be deleted or should be deleted or must not be deleted. So you can meet compliance requirements and also easily create audit reports for internal audits or for external audits. Governance for the approvals of the cases, the protection of the documents not to be deleted, including an automated processing and logging of these activities. Auditability, you can prove that you're compliant with the regulation, even that there is no complaint or a breach, if a supervisory authority should do a random audit and you would be the one who's selected. And as the way how to handle the cases is built in the solution, it's much less error prone because the case workers have a clear trail what activities they need to do for a subject access request, for procurement, for data protection impact assessment. It's less error prone, which reduces the risk and therefore the cost, especially avoiding the penalties, either by missing deadlines or not missing deadlines, or by deletion or non-deletion of documents. And with that retention management, with the capability to get rid of documents that you no longer need, you can also reduce the storage and the administration costs in running your finite repository. How do you get there? Novadoc and Zinit, we provide an exemplary implementation with an analysis conception based on our, let's say, best practice, our framework, which would be adapted to your specific requirements. The solution would be installed and configured, the backend service, the front-end services. If you already have FileNet installed, it would be just the add-on components. If you don't have FileNet, it would be the full solution. The functionality would be configured, the record structure, the case steps and the approvals, the retention settings, and the reporting. Then we would provide an administrator training so that you can, for example, configure new record structures, etc. And then Novadoc would also provide ongoing application management services, helping you to better run this platform and have less effort on your end. This solution would be delivered as a software as a service package, which includes the various software components, the Zinit software, the Novadoc software, NovaCap. If you don't yet have FileNet, it would also include FileNet. Optionally, you might also consider to include Stored IQ and Box if you want to do GDPR assessments, for example, or share data. It would be the consulting and the implementation of the solution by Novadoc and the ongoing management services. There are 2 contracts associated with that solution. The SaaS contract with Novadoc that covers the software and the ongoing application management services, and then a time and material contract for the one-off implementation at the beginning when you implement the solution, when you deploy the solution, so that everything is then covered in one package. With that, I'm almost done. So if you think that is helpful, that can make your life easier, meeting the duties and the deadlines coming with GDPR, we can do a joint analysis with you. Which processes would you like to cover? How many people would work with the solution? So we can determine a solution scenario for a tailored implementation, and also the costs for the software and the services, and then of course provide that in the management presentation. And with that, I would like to hand it back to John.
Thank you, Roland, for this webinar and taking us through our solution. Om het een en ander in te regelen, je ziet dat het allemaal veel breder is dan alleen IT. Praten we graag met jullie verder, uiteraard. En als Novadoc kennen we jullie specifieke situatie. En willen we graag meedenken over de verschillende componenten die we al in huis hebben of mogelijk kunnen toevoegen En wat het voordeel voor jullie kan betekenen voor GDPR en de AVG om daarom te voldoen. Dus allemaal bedankt voor de aanwezigheid. Voor meer vragen, ook jullie hebben mijn contactgegevens en zullen wij ook jullie de webinar doen toekomen. Dank jullie wel. Thank you, Roland.
Okay, thank you very much and have a good one.
Thank you very much.